Now, I'm going to start with a few slides which are very simple accounts of what AI is, what contemporary machine learning, deep neural network-based or stochastic AI is. That's the main AI paradigm that people use, and that would be the paradigm which would be used if we were able to create something like a robot police officer. So I'll take the spam filter as the example here. And the spam filter rests upon the fact that human beings assign emails to one of two categories, either spam or not spam. And if we keep a record of these assignments, then we can create a large amount of data, which is based out of tuples of input, which would be an email, and output, which would be an assignment of spam or not spam. And then we can use that gigantic body of tuples to train a neural net. And I'll explain what that means in a minute. So basically, you take all of these tuples and you turn them into binary vectors, which means very long strings of zeros and ones, very roughly, because that's the format that the computer can accept. And you use that very long set of tuples in the form of binary vectors to create what is effectively a big equation. It's a functional operator. So we can apply this functional operator to new emails and thereby yield an assignment of those new emails to either the spam bin or the not spam bin. So once we train the machine, then it can assign emails automatically. And we've trained the net on the basis of old emails so that we won't have to worry about assigning spam or not spam to new emails in the future. So this, as I say, creates a gigantic polynomial function. And that's a function which is applied to new binary vectors, which yields spam or not spam for a given email. And this works very well, but it only works if the new emails are like the old emails. In other words, if they're statistically sufficiently similar. And in technical terms, that means they have to have the same variance. And in more common or garden terms, that means that they have to use the same styles and tricks and formats for emails as were used by the emails that we use to train the net. Now, what this means is that the trained net is going to work, but over time, it's going to work less well because new styles and formats of spam emails are being invented all the time. Now, this is a limit on AI. It's a limit which can be overcome to a certain degree by constantly retraining a spam filter, but still, it's an important limit, which will be very important as we proceed. Okay, now let's see how this works for Google Translate. Here, the input data are, let's say, German sentences, for instance, in European Union documents. And then the output data are English translations. For the training set, we will use official English translations also created by the European Union. So we have a nice set of tuples which can be used to train a neural net, which is what Google did. And here the resulting equation is gigantic. It has 213 million parameters, and it's growing all the time. That's just for German English. Now, as you know, Google Translate works for many, many language pairs. Some language pairs have a lot of training material, and so the translations there are quite good. That holds of German English, French English, and so on. Some language pairs have much less data, and that means that you can't train the net so successfully, and that means that the quality of the translations is rather weak. So weak that the translations very often contain chunks of the original sentence from the wrong language in the translation. But still, Google Translate is a fantastic achievement. So I'm a strong believer in the limits of AI, but I'm also a strong believer in the fantastic feats that AI is able to achieve. if you have the right sorts and amounts of training data. So again, the Google Translate will work for German only if the new German sentences, which you use it to translate, have the same variance as those which you use to train the neural net which performs this translation function. So when will this kind of AI work? There are two alternative issues here. One has to do with the amount of data that you have to train your net. The more data you have for training, the better the results will be in general. And then also there's an issue which concerns whether we can create an algorithm of the appropriate sort at all. And we have to remember that the algorithm is a piece of mathematics. AI is not something which is newer and better and more powerful than old-fashioned mathematics. It's constrained by old-fashioned mathematics through and through. It can do some things better, and I'll try and explain that, but it can't do things which are not capable of being done by traditional mathematical means. All right, so in some cases, we have what we're going to call a simple system. Chess is an example of a simple system. A toaster or even a laptop are examples of simple systems. What this means is that they're run on the basis either of laws of physics or on the basis of simple rules, and as in the case of chess. And everything we know about the behavior of the system is already captured by those rules. Now, traffic law does not work just on the basis of rules. It involves all kinds of people who break the rules, and it involves weather and all kinds of other phenomena which don't care about the rules. And so we are likely to have a problem if we want to apply the approach which works for simple systems to complex systems such as road traffic. Okay, so if we have a simple system and we have huge amounts of data to train that simple system, then we have AI which works. And for the case of Google Translate, we have enough data because Google is a big organization which can invest the billions of dollars which it takes in order to collect that data. And this means a lot of data, so more than you could imagine. We're not going to get a lot of data for many of the phenomena that we're interested in when it comes to using AI. Now, the main thesis of this talk is that there are many, many complex systems. And for those complex systems, even we have, now I have here humongous raised to the power of 27. That's a kind of joke, since that would be more than there are atoms in the universe. But if we have even if we have all the data we could ever want to train our system, it still will not work. Or if it does work, it will rapidly deteriorate because AI only works for simple systems. And that's why people who use AI to trade on the stock market are not all rich, because the AI systems that they build work quite well for short-term phenomena, but then gradually they degrade. So we have simple systems and we have complex systems. I can talk about complex systems in more detail if people want, but we're going to assume just that the complex systems are the ones that involve things like organisms, weather, climate, seismology, finance. In other words, systems with many, many variables where prediction is very, very difficult if it's possible at all, and which are subject not just to competing forces coming from many different factors, but also to changing forces and changing types of factors as time goes by. And these factors, these changing factors, are the reason why you can't get enough data with the right variance, because as soon as you've collected data, the complex system will have changed its form. For instance, the organism will have grown older. All right, now there are some complex problems where we require exact prediction where AI will not work at all. Now, I give an example here of translating Kant into Louisiana French. There's no way Google Translate could ever solve that problem because it requires a degree of exactness of prediction that AI, stochastic AI, as I've been describing, cannot achieve. And we'll come back to that later. All right, now, Google Translate is a great achievement, but it works for a relatively easy case, namely static language. As soon as you try and use Google Translate in a dynamic situation, it fails. So the example that I'm going to be using here is a Japanese lady is traveling around in Australia. She doesn't understand English, and she's involved in a traffic accident, and a policeman who does not speak Japanese has to work out what happened from what she reports. And she's frazzled and wounded and so forth. So she's not speaking even clearly in Japanese. Now, you might think that Google Translate would be a sufficient tool here to help out the policeman work out what happened. And it isn't a useful tool. So we can't even make a traffic cop with an iPhone and Google Translate intelligent enough to cope with what is an example of translation, which we might think is already solved by Google. And so text, as I say, is relatively easy. Dynamics is very hard. And when we're dealing with dialogue, whether it involves Japanese speakers who don't speak English, even dialogue between two people who speak the same language, it's very, very hard to create an AI which can master what is needed to achieve human competence in dialogue. And that's why there is no example of a computer which has been able to pass the Turing test at the level of adult English. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the traffic cop. So I'm going to argue that a robot cop could not even take care of a simple speeding situation like the one that is illustrated here. And so I should say a little bit about how humans do this. Now, the story has to do with the incredible facility that human beings have to use language in their dynamic everyday behavior. Now, if you think about what happens when you meet somebody who is a stranger, you will realize that what happens is that the two strangers start talking about each other. They ask questions about the other person. Where are you from? What do you do? Do you like ice cream? You ask questions of that sort because you want to get to know the person. And that means not get to know a random list of facts about the person. You want to get to know the person in terms of issues like trustworthiness. So if you meet a stranger, the stranger may be trustworthy, but they may also have desires on you which you would not like to be realized in further contact. And so the reason why you press so hard on finding out what the person is like is because you want to know whether you should be continuing to talk to this person or not. Now, this fact that humans like to talk to each other is exploited by interrogators. The interrogators try and work out what your life story is, not as a list of facts, but as an emotionally laden clue to whether you are telling the truth or not. Now, this capability that we have to engage in dialogue has evolved over many, many years. And the reason it's evolved is because of lying. So language evolved in tandem with lying, and lying evolved in tandem with the evolution of detector mechanisms so that we can detect liars or people who are not trustworthy. And this has been going on ever since the beginning of language, which is 150,000 years ago. Now, we could, in principle, try to create an AI that would mimic this human language capability by, for instance, simulating evolution inside the computer. I will return to that issue later on, but basically it doesn't work. So in principle, we might think we can do it, but it doesn't work. Okay, so Google Translate uses many, many parameters. I will now, through a series of illustrations, show that human dialogue would require many, many more parameters. It would require 213 to the nth degree, where n is a number much bigger than a million. And that's because two reasons. First of all, there are many, many dimensions of variance. And secondly, half the data we would need, we can never have because it's inside people's heads. So in order to understand what a person means by a certain sentence, we would really need to know what's going on inside their head. And that can never be made available to the computer in the form of data. Now, we have a lot of data which we can use for translation. We probably have a lot less data which we can use for training a dialogue engine. We have YouTube videos of dialogues or conversations, but many of these are artificial. And a lot of them now are dialogues between chatbots and people, and they are absolutely useless for solving this problem. So there is a chatbot, which it's called Little Bing, which is used by, they say, 600 million people in China. And all of the conversations between Little Bing and all of those people are being recorded and used to improve Little Bing. But Little Bing is still very disappointing because the data which is being used to train Little Bing involves Little Bing speaking rather than a real human being. All right, so let's just look at some examples of the types of variance which are present in dialogue but not present in text, or anyway, not present in ways which are easily capturable by text. And I guess I can anticipate that one reason why they're not easily capturable from text is because you get them from context. And Google Translate is context-free. You don't give the context of the piece of text which you want Google to translate because you can't. Dialogue in practically all circumstances is full of context. And the first kind of context determines the cognolect. That's the dialect appropriate to the goals or purposes or status of the people involved. And these are just some examples. And then there is code or a style or tone. And again, I'm giving examples here. And you will see very quickly that there are going to be millions of examples of different codes. And that's just when we take the typical cases. For instance, a priest talking to a congregant, where if we have a priest talking to an expert on Frege's philosophy of sense and reference, then we would have yet another kind of code, which would be a strange mixture. So we're giving just the simple cases here. And then speech, when it occurs in human dialogue, isn't just a matter of strings of language. It involves also other kinds of behavior. It involves gestures. I'm waving my arm around as I'm speaking now. It involves bowing. It involves walking away gradually from the person you are talking to because you don't want to continue the conversation, and so on and so on. And then there is the setting in the physical sense, which also determines the way people speak, what they talk about, and so forth, and adds extra dimensions of variance. And then you can have the normal cases where a policeman is in a police station, or other cases where the policeman is in a nursery, for instance. And once again, that will have an effect upon the kind of dialogue that will occur. And imagine trying to collect enough data about the way police speak in a nursery in order to train a neural net to understand such dialogue and respond appropriately. You'll probably fail to collect enough natural data, and you'll probably fail to get funding to create artificial data by placing police in nurseries for purposes of showing that you can train a neural net to engage in dialogue in such circumstances. And then we have modality. Again, Google Translate doesn't know anything about modality, but all human dialogue involves at least some, probably several of these different kinds of modality, of which I'm just giving a few samples here. And then the big one, the really big one, from a numerical point of view, that there is the dimension of variance, which turns on the question of what you're communicating about. And here, the entire universe is a possible topic of conversation. And to collect training data about all possible topics would be not just difficult, it would be impossible. And now, a more interesting one from a logical point of view is that there are problems about understanding dialogue behavior computationally, which turn on logical features of dialogue. Dialogues can be about themselves. They can involve self-reference. A dialogue can become its own context. And then there's a whole bundle of issues connected with dialogue economy, which has to do with the fact that the language has to be small enough that people will remember enough words, but it has to be powerful enough that it can represent every possible situation. And so we cheat, we use language in simple ways to capture more complicated messages, as is illustrated by these examples here, or by these ritual examples. Everybody knows what these ritual examples mean, and that's a good thing because it means that we can exploit the economy of language and we in ways which will imply all kinds of consequences stretching forward into the future in all kinds of interesting ways. They're contextual features relating to the future, which again, Google Translate cannot cope with because Google Translate is dialogue free. And then another dimension of variance has to do with turn taking. So in the Turing test setup, the original setup, the turn taking was very strict. There are two partners and they take turns, as in a telex message or in a text message format. One person speaks, the interrogator asks a question, and the computer or the human participant in the test give a response. But real dialogue isn't like that at all. And particularly conversation is not like that at all. But real dialogue too involves constant interruption. And each interruption will affect the intentions of the speakers involved in ways which break the intentions which are associated in the minds of the speakers when they begin, the interrupted speakers when they begin speaking. Interruptions change the context. They change the horizons. And if you notice the interruption, then the dialogue itself, or that feature of the dialogue, which is called interruption, becomes part of the context of the dialogue. And the possibility of future interruptions become part of the horizon of the dialogue. And so the dialogue changes. And again, there are so many different combinations of the ways these things can happen. This is an example of dialogue. These are all places where more than one person is speaking at once. Sometimes more than two persons are speaking at once. All right. So I hope it's clear that it's going to be difficult, if not impossible. I think it's clearly impossible to train a neural network because we will not have sufficient data. But there is a, well, there are several reasons for this. One, as I've already mentioned, it's hard to get historical records of dialogues, of real dialogues. People started recording dialogues only relatively recently. And we know that we haven't got even a small fraction of 1% of what we would need to make any kind of headway in terms of training a net. But again, we're only going to get half the data anyway, because the data pertaining to the intentions of the people involved, what they actually mean, what they want out of the dialogue, all of that data is implicit. It's inside the mind of the people, and so it can't be used to train the net. So we have two radical shortfalls. But there's another reason. So dialogues are dynamic, and what we need if we're going to have a stochastic model is some kind of equation which captures a dynamic model, a dynamic phenomenon like dialogue. And there are only two kinds of process models which exist in mathematics. There are differential equation models, and then there are what are called stochastic process models, such as Brownian motion. And both of these require the Markov property, which means that the state of the dynamic process at any given time can rely only on the state of the dynamic process at the immediate preceding time. Any Turing machine which could model any dynamic process would have to have an equation which fits into either the first box or the second box or some combination of both of those boxes. And all human dialogue fails to have the Markov property. And so there is a mathematical impossibility as well as a practical impossibility, turning on the fact that we just can't build models unless we have, can't build stochastic models inside a machine unless we have corresponding mathematical models which they would conform to. And so Turing machines can't pass a Turing test, which we all know. We've been trying to do it now for 40 years. The quality of bank teller bots on the phone when you try and use your phone to perform complex banking operations will illustrate the fact that computers do not know how to do dialogue. And this is a sort of embarrassment. Okay, so I've said all of that. Now, what can machines do? So on the one hand, we have artificial general intelligence, which is trying to create an AI which would be as intelligent as a human being. And then we have what is called narrow AI, which works for the simple systems which I referred to earlier. They refer to AI along certain narrow, well-defined tracks where we either have good mathematical models or where we have a simple set of rules which we can know exactly because they're transparent. And chess or Go are examples of those rules. The law, potentially, I will come back to the law in a minute. And then, of course, we also have to have sufficient training data. Then we can make narrow AI work. And we can do wonderful things with narrow AI, not just restricted to chess and games like that, but wonderful things in business, industry, manufacturing, and so forth. But we can't do police work. And that's what I'm going to show. So this paper, it was actually published by Synthese in 2019 on their online first page. So it's been on the cloud for 2 years now. And finally, they are printing it on paper. But of course, not really, because, well, I suppose some people still look at Synthese on paper, but most people look at it on the screen in any case. But it will now have a volume number in Synthese, as of this week, as I understand. This is about what I've just been saying, particularly in connection with the distinction between narrow AI and artificial general intelligence. And you'll see that it has a co-author, Jobst Landgräber, who I was talking to some of you about earlier before we started the official part of these proceedings. Jobst is a German. He's the grandson of Ludwig Landgräber, who was a quite prominent philosopher, the last of Husserl's assistants. And Jobst himself is a philosopher, but he's also the founder and owner of an AI company in Germany. And so he knows a lot about AI, and everything I know about AI, I get from him. So this is just the life story of Jobst. I like to describe him as a serial Renaissance man, because this is only a fraction of what he's done with his life so far, some of which I can't talk about. But the conclusion is his work for his company Cognotect is devoted exclusively to narrow AI, which means choosing a very narrow lane, such as insurance claims, and then taking a lot of documents expressing insurance claims, turning them into logic, and using that logic in order to process future insurance claims in the way that the original insurance claims had been processed, along the lines I described when talking about the spam filter earlier. This works because there are enough data and there is a rather strict set of rules which he can capture in his system. So he's not trying to do general intelligence, he is trying to do narrow AI. All right, so now let's go to robots. There are many robots working well using narrow AI in factories all over the world, more every day. So this is a success story. And then narrow AI is what DeepMind is using when it solves games like Go. And there are narrow AI stationary robots, or more likely just computers in lawyers' offices, which are using narrow AI to do legal research, for instance. And what happens is, as in the case of the company founded by Jobs, is that there are certain stock activities that the law office deals with. And for those stock activities, we can write algorithms or AI machine learning algorithms which work for cases which fall within that specific family of cases. Now, the question is whether there are areas of a mobile, so all of those are stationary. We're now talking about a mobile robot cop. And the question is there anything which the mobile robot cop could do where the robot cop would need to rely only on narrow AI? And my answer to that question is no. And anyone who has objections, counterexamples to this thesis, I would be particularly interested in hearing of. Okay, so before we go to the robot cop, let's just take a robot human being or a robot human being substitute dealing with the phenomenon of queuing, which is a very simple phenomenon, but still not capable of being coped adequately by a robot. So a robot needs to get into a queue. It's been sent by its owner to queue up for the new beans which have been put on the market. And so he walks towards the queue. Now, let's assume, to keep things simple, that he knows where the queue starts or ends. Because, of course, sometimes it's not clear where the queue starts or ends. But now a question immediately arises. He's standing in the queue, or it is standing in the queue, and someone tries to jump the queue ahead of it. So what should it do? Well, it depends on the situation. Nobody told the robot under what situations it should allow queue jumping. Human beings learn that, and it's part of a kind of empathy process that they perform. So, for instance, in an emergency room, we would allow lots of queue jumping behavior, which we would otherwise try to dissuade people from engaging in. And we can think of other ways in which the robot would be in the dark about what the appropriate kind of behavior is, even for a simple queue. And then we'll move to something slightly more difficult, an aggressive beggar. So humans behave in very subtle ways in responding to aggressive beggars. They have to have a very, very sensitive set of systems for dealing with an aggressive beggar. And the aggressive beggar awakens contradictory motives. On the one hand, you want to behave altruistically, but on the other, you want to commiserate with the beggar. You want to follow social norms. You want to demonstrate your virtue. But on the other hand, you may not know whether you can trust the beggar. You want to achieve concord. You want to be nice to the beggar, but the beggar may be in process of getting you ready to be mugged. And so you have to take it into account the degree of danger which the beggar represents, and do this in such a way that you are not revealing that you are distrustful, because that, again, would not be something which a human would find, other humans would find appropriate. You have to take into account questions like whether people in the surroundings would come to your aid if the beggar became violent, and so on and so on. And in order to cope with all of these factors, human beings have a mastery of empathy and of weighing circumstances and of detecting potential cheaters along the lines which I described earlier. All right, now that's a piece of Jobst which says the same thing, but you can see that his style of writing slides is different from mine. So now we're back to the police case. So let's take the simplest possible case for a robot cop, a mobile robot cop. The robot has a sensor which detects speeding, and it has an algorithm which tells the robot when it needs to proceed, in other words, follow the speeding vehicle in order to execute a stop. Let's just assume that it's succeeded in executing a stop. So it's the robot cop is standing next to the window of the speeding car, and the robot can't just pull the speeding car driver out of the car and throw him or her in the back of his car. I guess the robot cop would have a car, because we don't behave in that way when people speed. We need to use judicious, delicate interrogation in order to determine what the appropriate course of action is. So again, we'll take the simplest case. The driver allows herself to be subjected to questioning. She does not protest. She does not drive away in order to elude the robot. She just does what is the honest and polite thing to do. And then some of the situations that result may be perfectly simple situations which can be dealt with algorithmically, in other words, with narrow AI, in the way in which the paralegal office dealt with a certain family of cases which they had in their stock of cases for which they had algorithms. So if there's no driving license, for instance, then the traffic cop knows that he has to write a certain kind of ticket and then say, "Goodbye, madam," and she drives away. And similarly for other kinds of features. But in many, we're going to deal with many situations like that, we hope, but in many other situations, there won't be a stock algorithm which the robot cop can use. There will be something unpredictable. The driver gives an excuse. He suspects that she's lying. He thinks that there may be drugs in the trunk of the car because of the items that he sees on the seat. He thinks she might be a bit crazy. He notices that she's being inconsistent in her responses. He has to find new responses in order to work out what's going on. In order to do that, he would have to have human-like linguistic intelligence and human-like cheater detector mechanisms. And as I have tried to show, he couldn't have any of those things. And this is just for the simplest case. The idea that we could use robot cops for more difficult cases is just unsupportable, given what we know about what computers can achieve. All right, so I'll say a little bit more. The basis of the story that I gave is that we have linguistic capabilities which are of a very high order. Those linguistic capabilities are not confined merely to language. So we talk about speech acts. We can do things with language. And already using language involves many more organs of the body than just the brain and the speech organs. We need to use the stomach, for instance, in order to pump air through the larynx. So we have an incredibly well-developed set of bodily parts which are tuned to create language and to respond to language by digesting the language of other people with whom they communicate. And this is based on neurophysiological structures which have evolved over millions of years, but it's also based on training. So we get the ability to speak from our genes, but we get the ability to speak any specific language only because we've been trained. It's part of culture. And we could perhaps imitate this gigantic training phenomenon in a computer, but it would involve a lot of data of just the kind which I've suggested is difficult to obtain. And we'll come back to that later on if we have time. So we survived the development of language, even though language is a phenomenon which makes it very easy to cheat and to lie. We've survived because we evolved dishonest signaling detector mechanisms and cheater detection mechanisms. And so human cops manage delicate traffic situations by calling on those features of their linguistic capabilities which have evolved in order to detect cheaters and to manage difficult situations of various sorts. And then one question is, can we simulate these capabilities inside a machine? And I'm not going to have time today to go through it, but I have a number of slides which show that we can't do that. But I'm going to conclude with slides about the area of cognitive science and psychology, which I think is most promising for understanding how we do it. One implication of everything I've said is that we are not computers. If it's impossible for a Turing machine to master human language, which I believe is the case, then it follows that we are not Turing machines because we have mastered human language. It follows, in other words, that the computational model of the mind is wrong. And if the computational model of the mind is wrong, then the question is, what is a better model? And a better model, I believe, can be found, or the kernel of it, in J.J. Gibson, who was the founder of a school of psychology called ecological psychology. And in very simple terms, he thinks that people relate to their surroundings like tuning forks. They're tuned to the environment in which they live, and they're tuned to the environment in which they've been trained to act properly. So we are tuned, for instance, to behave properly in environments where there is written text, as is proved by the fact that we can read written text, providing it's in the right language, with great facility. So all organisms, from Gibson's point of view, are like tuning forks. They're multi-level, very, very highly adjustable and quickly and spontaneously adjustable tuning forks. And these tuning forks have evolved to resonate to the relevant parts of the relevant niches in which those organisms have been designed to survive, designed by evolution. So perception is the area of resonation which Gibson focused on. So he didn't extend this to cognition and culture in the way that I am attempting here. That's one of the issues which still needs to be worked out, I have to confess. But for Gibson, perception is resonance. Not thinking, not computing, but resonating. And now we resonate to language, we resonate to each other, we resonate deontically. That's feelings, the feelings we have when we see someone beating up a small child. That's deontic resonation. And then mathematicians have been trained to resonate to the structures of mathematical reality. That's a long story, which I certainly don't want to go into today. So Gibson's approach is that we should study the ways in which organisms exist in their real world environments, not the way they react to environment-free or context-free sense data or context-free linguistic strings, but rather the way they react as moving, acting organisms to the real world environment in which they need to act. And this real world environment includes things like roads and road signs and traffic police and so forth. And I don't need to go into this. So we resonate deontically when we drive in traffic. Well, that is to say, we follow the traffic laws. We've been trained to follow the traffic laws. We don't have to think about them. We certainly don't have to compute about them. We resonate directly because that's what happens when we learn to drive. We don't just learn the mechanical parts of driving, we also learn the deontic parts of driving. And when you learn to become a traffic cop, then you learn to resonate not just with the road and the steering wheel and so forth, but also with other drivers, documents, traffic signs. And you do all of that in ways which yield as outputs things like traffic tickets. It's a very simple story of a very complicated matter. Now, one last thing. So there was actually a second ecological psychologist who was much less well known than Gibson. His name was Roger Barker. And where Gibson was interested in perception primarily, Barker was interested in behavior, social action, as he calls it. And so he coined the term behavior setting or behavioral setting, which are recurrent settings which serve as the environments for our everyday activities. Nowadays, of course, there is the Zoom setting. We are now in a Zoom setting, and we've been in the Zoom setting so often recently that we know automatically what we need to do. But we are also sometimes in a table in the well, we used to be anyway, in the table in the cafeteria setting, or the train to Long Island setting, or the traffic cop used to be in the this morning's traffic duty on Highway 101 setting. In such a setting, we resonate to the same sorts of things every day. And that means that we behave in the same sorts of ways every day. We get out of bed, we go and have breakfast, we drink our coffee and so forth, because we're tuned to the environment in which those things are the appropriate things to do. And that means there is a mutual fit between the behaviors that we engage in and the settings, which may be settings involving roads and steering wheels, or they may be settings involving coffee cups and tables. In either case, there is a mutual fittingness. This all sounds very trivial, I know. But there is this harmonious fit arises not because of anything like computation. All right, so this is a quote. Behavior settings are natural units. To a layman, they are as objective as rivers and forests. They are parts of the objective environment that are experienced as directly as rain and sandy beaches are experienced. But that scientists don't deal with behavior settings. Ordinary people deal with them all the time, but the reason why scientists don't deal with them is that scientists like to deal always with some specific single channel, with deontic powers, for instance, or with traffic signs, or with actions, or with language. They don't realize that most human behavior involves dozens of these dimensions, which come together spontaneously in the same sorts of ways every single day of our lives. So, the conceptual incommensurability of phenomena, which is such an obstacle to the unification of the sciences, does not appear to trouble nature's units. That means behavior settings. Within the larger units, such as a traffic system, things and events from conceptually more and more alien sciences are incorporated and regulated. Nobody does that. It's a niche which evolves all by itself as a result of our behavior, and that's why our behavior fits it so well. And so I don't need to say this. So the human language system is a complex system. Every dialogue creates a little niche in which people know how to behave and how to respond politely or less than politely. Because there are so many different kinds of contexts, so many different kinds of intentions that the participants in a dialogue may have, it's impossible to gather enough data to model that phenomenon in a machine. And even if you could gather enough data, you still couldn't model it in a machine for mathematical reasons. So that means that human language cannot be mastered by narrow AI. There can, for the same reasons, there cannot be general AI, and so human language can't be mastered by any kind of computer.